Welcome to Etude number 12, part 1. This has all been part of the Villa Lobos 12 and 12 challenge. 12 etudes across 12 months, and we're finally here on the last and biggest etude of the set. Let's dive into the main points for microstudy number 1. Welcome to microstudy number 1. Just a quick note to say that prior to this, hopefully you have had a look at the two primer exercises I've already put up, which will help with the third section in a couple of videos time, and this section now with the chord shapes and shifting them up and down. Alright, counting wise, we have 3 different time signatures here. We have a 9/8, a 6/8 and a 2/4. They are generally the same underlying pulse, so if this is your crotchet beat, 9/8 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 6/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then 2/4. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. You need the ability to be able to just switch and shorten down the notes as the bar length shortens. The underlying pulse doesn't change. This etude goes from quavers to semiquavers, ignoring the time in the bars. Again, anchor to the pulse. So here's your pulse, and it's just going to go 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and a. You can feel as I'm saying it that there is a push-pull to that triplet semiquaver effect. This idea has floated through pretty much most of the 12 etudes in some form. Villa Lobos loves going from triplets to semiquavers, or from quavers to semiquavers to triplets. Either way, there is always that push-pull in the rhythms in the etudes. For the most part, there is only one chord shape that Villa Lobos has shifted up and down the fretboard here, but there is, on the last beat of the first and second bars, a second chord shape, so make sure that you are aware of it, an F. Bar number 2 has an extra bass beat to it. Don't be fooled, it's not the same as bar number 1. Get that extra bass beat in. And last point, your left hand fingers have got to be light on the fretboard. Do not squeeze in and push into the strings, especially with your thumb. This is a fantastic exercise for learning your left hand pressure, because otherwise, if your left hand pressure is not light, you're going to find yourself struggling with this and actually in pain. You also will not be able to shift all 3 of those notes up the fretboard, so you need to be able to have a light touch, light enough to push up. As with the last etude, there is going to be squeaking, so please do not stress about it. That's just the way it is. If you want to lessen the squeaks, especially if you have new strings, just lift the second finger up ever so slightly. You still have fingers 1 and 3 on, which can be used as guide fingers up and down the nylon strings. Let's dive into this fantastic opening. Welcome to microstudy number 1. I'm not going through the chord shapes, we're just going to step through the melody. I've already done the chord shapes in the previous etude. First thing to note is the melody. That melody is pretty much the entirety of this second string, so keep that in mind. Learn the melody first. And then we're into the next microstudy. That will help you really anchor these chord shapes. Fingers don't change except for the end of the bar. Where we have a 4th finger on an F. Everything is anchored around the E or the A string in this entire etude pretty much. It either bounces between E and A. So use them as the main harmonic source for a bigger picture. Shifting wise, do not squeeze in. Your thumb could even come off the back of the guitar to just really hammer home just how much you do not need to push. So my thumb is off entirely for that. You do not need to push in. Your thumb is a support here. And because you're pushing 3 notes up, that is going to squeak. There's no two ways about it, so do not worry about the squeaking too much. From a right hand perspective, I'm using IMA until I really want to dig in and hammer home any accents, but if I wanted to, I could use IM for the entirety of it as well. But it gives it a slightly different feel to the bass notes, so that is your choice. That idea repeats, and then Villa Lobos decides to move it up the fretboard and develop that initial idea. So again, we kick off, and if you notice, we're moving in minor thirds. Again, this is a lovely idea that floats through all of Villa Lobos' etudes, and in this one in particular, because we're going to see that diminished minor third idea pop up again in a later section of the piece. Okay, so I've already mentioned it, but main things to notice is that in bar 2 on the third beat, we have an A. So everything is anchored around the A in this section. Bar 1. That extra A push there. After that, the idea shortens to 6/8. From here, it then doubles in intensity from a rhythmic point of view, where Villa Lobos does to the point where we're actually an octave above. Entire octave above, again an idea that floats through Villa Lobos' oeuvre, as it were. From a counting point of view, the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1 does not show. Again, anchoring all of this. Is that diminished third. From the A minor chord, the idea just moves down in chromatics. C to B, B to B flat, B flat to A flat, and then to G, where we're into the next microstudy. The best tip I can give you for this is to just do that a couple of times till you have it, and then stick the chords in with the bass notes, which will make it so much easier. Realistically, if you've done the work on the chord shapes already in those previous microstudies, it should just be a case of putting them together in the right rhythms and in the right contours for the melody. Let's take a look at this in slow motion. Welcome to microstudy number 2. Microstudy number 2 starts with the A minor shape up in E minor and up the fretboard, and we have the triplets going into semiquavers 2/3 of the way across a 9/8 bar. So you need to be aware of that. Again, stick to the crotchet pulse and just count them out. If you have the 53 edition, you're probably looking at me confused because there's no semiquavers in your bars. That was an error, so make sure that that is fixed. Bar 9, beats 2 and 3 are semiquavers. Main tip number 2 here, your fingers are going to get squished as you move up the fretboard here. You need to learn the spacing for the fingers, and that A minor shape is really going to get squished in, so you need to adjust your left hand spacing. One final point though, depending on how high the action of your guitar is how much you're going to have to add a little bit of extra pressure here. On my guitar the action's quite high, so I have to actually push in and dig in a little bit deeper to the strings than what would be normally required. Hopefully that is not the case for you, but you shouldn't be digging in too much, because again it needs a light touch to shift those chords up and down the guitar, even at higher tension in this section of the fretboard. let's dive in and check out this microstudy. Alright, welcome to microstudy number 2. So microstudy number 2 picks off from the E minor shape, picks up from the E minor chord, still A minor shape, just up at E, and again we still have the same idea from the beginning, transposed, but on its repeat, instead of going the minor third or diminished third, we're up at a major third, into a little chromatic idea. So if I do that with the slurs, and that is it in essence, just with the chord shapes put in. The only other thing to notice is, again, Villa Lobos has added a little bit of an extra chord shape on the end of the first bar. We get that fourth finger coming in again for a C chord. There's nothing difficult here if you've done the first microstudy. The only other thing to notice is the bass line now sticks at 1 bass line per bar, and we're staying in 9/8. The shift between the triplets and the semiquavers stays the same as long as you keep that underlying crotchet pulse there. You just need to count them out. Let's take a look at this in slow motion. Welcome to microstudy number 3. This is a primer microstudy for the next one, which is the big technical challenge of this section, where Villa Lobos has used 2 chord shapes broken up into triplets. The first chord shape looks like this. It's a half bar with a 4th finger on, a melody with a stretch across 4 frets. So it's at 10, at 7, at 4, and at 1. And as you can see, as we move down the fretboard, those stretches between the 2 frets in between start to get a little bit bigger. So I would get used to just doing this. And that is the first chord shape, the easy one of the 2. The next chord shape involves the A minor shape again, but this time we have a stretch. Now I've put grace notes in so that you can gently work up to this. So we have the A minor shape anchoring off my first finger at 8, at 5, at 2, and then obviously just some open strings. So here we're going to go the stretch. Now that is quite a big stretch there once you hit this bit here at the 2nd fret. You need to get a stretch between these 2 fingers. Alright, so I would sit there and just practice this, trying to get the stretch out of those 2 fingers. Up here it's not too much of an issue, and even here it's not too problematic. But here, and so get used to practicing those 2 shapes and moving them up and down the fretboard and getting that stretch between fingers 4 and 3 nice and correct. One thing to note as well is there is 2 ways to play that section. You can actually use a half bar as opposed to, and I would practice that for sure, because it does make this section easier as a half bar. So those are the 2 chord shapes, and we're going to see how Villa Lobos utilizes them in the next microstudy. Welcome to microstudy number 4. Microstudy number 4 is the first challenge of this section, and the main points here are: it is possible to play this 2 different ways. You can play it as a half bar, or you can play it with just your fingers. Beware though that when you're playing it with just your fingers, you need to wiggle your first finger a little bit more than normal. It is slightly easier playing this entire section as just a series of half bars down the fretboard where fingers 1 and 4 pretty much stay still and fingers 2 and 3 adjust around the chord shapes. Point number 2. Due to the triplets, the beats are going to change, which is what Villa Lobos is obviously after, and it gives you a funny off-on feeling as the melody note moves from the first beat to the second beat in and around the triplets. So be aware of that. Try not to make it into a 4 feeling. It should have a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 feeling to it. Final point. As usual, laser ahead. Make sure that you know those chord shapes in and out. If you've practiced the primer, you will have already learned where the 2 different chord shapes are. They're very closely related. It's just a sequence moving down the fretboard, but in such a quick fashion that it is easier to memorize and learn these chord shapes ahead of time. Let's dive in and check out this fantastic segue into the next section. Welcome to microstudy number 4. Microstudy number 4 picks up after microstudy number 2 here at G minor. So we have already looked at the chord shapes in the previous microstudy, so it's now going to be a case of putting them together. From a right hand perspective, it is PIMA, Right, now I'm going to stop here for 2 seconds while we'll go back over that. Left hand, obviously the chords are broken up now, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, half bar, 4, half bar with 2, 3, 1, 4, half bar, 4, half bar with 2, 3, 1. And obviously you can, if you want to really, it's a little bit of an extra effort, is just do 1, 2, 3, half bar, 1, 2, 3, half bar, 1, 2, 3, half bar, and so forth and so on down the fretboard. That's your choice. Most people just do that with the half bar going down. In the 1953 edition we have a discrepancy between this note and this note here. There's actually an A sharp. The A sharp makes it slightly more challenging when you get to this chord because of the stretch. The only thing really to say about this section is you're going to struggle if your fingers do not have a good stretch between fingers 3 and 4. This can be trained out. I've already done a full set of stretching exercises which will help with this, but the main thing is just put the stretching into the piece and work it with the chord shapes, which will help, especially that one here. That A to A sharp is going to be a tough one. Let's take a look at this in slow motion. Section, which begins on a very, very discordant E, or if you want to, F major with an E in the bass. Thank you very much for staying until the end. This has been part of the Villa Lobos 12 and 12 challenge hosted by classicalguitarrocks.com. Every single one of Villa Lobos' 12 etudes now is up there for you to learn and to dive into, so head over there, grab yourself some free stuff. There are a ton of extra lessons to help with getting these under your fingers and some awesome lessons on modern classical guitar music that is intermediate to advanced. So if you're looking for a challenge and want to develop your chops and get some 6-string inspiration, head over there now.